So I'm going to continue the topic on GMOs and just start off today by saying that the term itself, GMO, for the sake of this conversation, is imprecise and too broad. I started this conversation, using that term and, allowed it to continue that way. And I think that was wrong. I think it was important that it should have been, the conversation should have been more focused. So a lot of the comments I've gotten in response have basically been pointing that out, and things have gotten a little confused. So to try to clarify, GMOs in general are hand in glove with industrial farming practices, but not all GMOs themselves are inherently bad. And as has been explained previously, the danger of GMOs, as I see it, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether or not they're actually bad to eat, but instead relate to the potential unintended consequences of altering food crops to interact with the environment differently than they would naturally, to actually bring them in line with those agricultural practices. So for those who've been in contact to say that GMOs are not the problem, only maybe specific crops or the industrial agricultural practices are the problem, I will at least tentatively agree with some caveats. So the way I see it, we're choosing between two bad options. Now, to lay the scene, I think it's undeniable that the aforementioned GMOs and industrial agricultural practices and technological advances of the last 50 years have definitely increased food yields and have fed a lot of people that way. And so, now that we've started doing that, if we were to stop, there would be the definite negative consequence of millions of people, potentially dying or, at least becoming food insecure. At the very least, it would be a unbearable shock to the system. Now, the other option is the possibility of environmental problems in the long-term use of GMOs and these irresponsible industrial agricultural practices. And those are just theoretical. I mean, we hope they're not there, but there is no way for anyone to know. There's no science on it. So the pro-GMO people say that the anti-GMO people are anti-science, like climate deniers and anti-vaccine activists. And, I take umbrage with that. I don't see myself that way at all. And frankly, the pro-GMO absolutists sound to me like those who promised 100 years ago that oil was a miracle substance that would free the world from manual labor forever, for instance. And, those people were right about those short-term benefits of oil, but completely missed the long-term downfalls. Humanity has existed, in a very stable state as a species for many thousands of years. And that whole time, we were completely unable to have a measurable impact on our environment. We existed totally within it. And only recently have we started, I think, destabilizing ourselves with these discoveries and so-called advances with great short-term benefits without understanding the downsides at all. Nuclear power with then disasters like Chernobyl or Fukushima, and oil with the resulting greenhouse gases that cause climate change, which people 100 years ago couldn't have imagined. So now we feel like we live side by side with nature rather than in it, I think. So we feel like we can manipulate nature without feeling the effects. And there is simply no science available on the long-term effects of our new advancements as we come up with them. And those who are cautious about these issues are so because we have a demonstrated record of reckless leaps forward in technology that all seemed like really good ideas at the time, only to come back and bite us later. So from our experience and our bad track record with these unintended consequences that accompany those major advances, the only thing we should know for sure is that working with nature is the only way to ensure long-term stability as a species, whereas fighting and manipulating it may yield positive results in the near term, but could result in unforeseeable consequences in the long term. And to say those who oppose GMOs and irresponsible industrial farming practices are anti-science is as short-sighted as those early oil promoters who didn't see climate change coming. Tampering with ecological systems that sustain all life on Earth, even ever so mild tampering, is not something that should be done lightly. However, now that we've started going down the path of pursuing these various advances in energy and food production, we've begun to enjoy those short-term benefits. Cheap fossil fuel energy in the form of electricity and these industrial farming practices, which, yield more food and so on, have actually fulfilled their promises of increasing productivity, less manual labor, increase food yields, which help feed populations that would otherwise be food insecure, and generally raise the standard of living for people all around the world. Turning back really isn't an ethical option at this point, as so many lives hang in the balance, and the only way forward is forward. But I think at least we should do it, all the while making every attempt to curb that arc and bring ourselves back into balance with nature. So the way I see it, we're sort of on a treadmill. We're slowly picking up speed as one advancement leads to the necessity of the next and the next and the next. And if you realize that things are getting out of control and we're actually not benefiting ourselves and we're having too many unintended consequences, you can't just stop at the treadmill. If you want to get off a moving treadmill, the answer is not to just stop running. You'll get thrown to the ground and scrape your knee and it'll be really sad. You need to slow down before you can eventually stop. And so to slow down our consumption of energy and food, we need to stabilize population through education, women's empowerment. That is what has been shown over and over again throughout the world. The more educated the population becomes and the more women are empowered, the more the population stabilizes. And so eventually, world population will sort of level off. We'll have a baseline to work on and hopefully get a sustainable system in place that can feed that many people and give the energy that many people need, and so on. And so what's ethical is to continue to figure out a way to feed everyone. But the methods that work to feed everyone today aren't guaranteed to be free of those unintended consequences later on. And so, I have to think to myself, would it have been unethical to prevent oil from being exploited when it had the power to relieve so much suffering? I mean, frankly, I think the potential benefits of oil and the damage that it would do was so far out of sight that, at the time, you can hardly blame them. There was no ethical argument that could easily have been made at the time to say, no, we shouldn't use this oil. Only now, 100 years later, do we actually begin to see the full consequences of our actions. And so now we get to this whole debate that we're having, GMOs and science and anti-science and people yelling at each other back and forth. And it just so happens that I'm reading a Carl Sagan book right now. And last night I was reading as I went to bed and read this bit I'm about to read to you. It's like speaking directly to this conversation on, science and skepticism and so on. So Carl Sagan says, at the heart of science is an essential balance between two seemingly contradictory attitudes, an openness to new ideas, no matter how bizarre or counterintuitive, and the most ruthlessly skeptical scrutiny of all ideas, old and new. This is how deep truths are winnowed from deep nonsense. The collective enterprise of creative thinking and skeptical thinking working together keeps the field on track. Unquote. And, so blindly following where scientific advancement takes us, like oil, can be just as harmful as blindly resisting them, like vaccines. And so the pro-GMO callers have been referring to the scientific advancements of corporations like Monsanto and Dow Chemical as if they were synonymous with science itself, and that to be against the advancements of these companies is to be against science. And I want to be really clear that corporations that use science and the concept of science are not synonymous. The bad track record that we have of tampering with the environment for short-term gain only to suffer long-term consequences have, not coincidentally, come mostly at the hands of corporations, which, it just so happens, mirrors almost those exact same practices regardless of their field. We see it over and over again, quarterly profits over long-term strategy. Corporations do not have the same motivations as people or the human race in general, obviously. While we may be seeking for ways to live better in the moment, and some of us might even be trying to have some foresight about how to manage our society in ways that'll leave it in good shape for future generations, corporations are focused on profit, and that is really just about it. And humanity's needs and corporate actions can often be in sync, don't be mistaken, but if there comes a time when they diverge, the corporations will always go to where the money is. And so therefore, the solution needs to involve openness and transparency, which these corporations will always resist, so that we can make our decisions based on facts available. And this requires the government, representing the people, to maintain oversight over these corporate practices. And as every conversation always has to come back to this, It requires that we lessen the effect of money on politics so that the very corporations we seek to oversee can't use their profits to influence the overseers. So as I've said before, maybe labeling GMO foods is not the answer, and that's overbroad and overly simplistic, but getting information to the people is the answer. We need to have a collective understanding of where our food comes from, how it's produced, what possible impacts those production methods have, so that we can decide together through our actions how we want to proceed as a species. There is no human dictator that decides how humanity will proceed. We can only proceed by understanding our world around us and then acting on it collectively. And so as an informed electorate is necessary for a functioning democracy, humanity as a whole needs to be informed if we want to have half a chance of defending against long-term unforeseen dangers brought about by profit-seeking corporations who do not share our same priorities for survival.